All right, let's see what I've done here. And by the way, don't worry if your code is different from mine. We all think and code differently, so it's perfectly fine if your code is different. Just look at my code, see what I've done here, and see if there are ways you can improve your code. That's what matters, okay? So here in our main method, first I've declared two final variables or constants. The first one is month in year, which I've set to 12, and the second one is percent, which I've set to 100. The reason I declared these constants is that I didn't want to have magic numbers in this code. So over here, where we calculate the monthly interest, we get the annual interest and divide it by percent and then months in year. This code is very self-explanatory. Someone else reading this code will have no problem understanding what's going on here. In contrast, if you had a magic number here, like divide by 12 and then 4, whatever, someone else reading this code would wonder, what is this 4 doing here? What is 12? Now, it's quite obvious to you that 12 is the number of months in a year, but trust me, sometimes other people cannot see this straight away. So, as a best practice, avoid magic numbers in your code. Always use constants or final variables to describe them. So, let's revert this back. All right. So, after declaring this constants, I have created this scanner object. Here we ask the first question, principal, and we read the answer as an integer. I thought integer is a good data type for storing the principal. Because short is not enough, with short we can store a maximum of $32,000. That's not enough. What if someone wants to finance $1 million? So int is good, and it allows us to store a value up to 2 billion. Next, we ask the second question, annual interest rate. We read this as a float. Here I could use double, but the interest rate is a small number, so float is sufficient for that. We don't really need double. So we get the annual interest, and then based on that, we calculate the monthly interest. Also, see how I have named my variables? All variables have a proper, meaningful names. There are no magic words here like MI as in short for monthly interest or M1 or M2. Do not use magic names for your variables. Always use meaningful and descriptive names. All right. Next, we get the period. We read this as a byte because the maximum number we want to support is 30. So 1 byte is sufficient to store the number 30 or anything smaller. Now, based on the number of years, we calculate the number of payments. Note the camel notation here. I've capitalized the first letter of every word except the first word. So we get years and multiply it by months in year. Again, the code is very self-explanatory. Once we collect all this data, then we calculate the mortgage. So we get the principal multiplied by this expression and then divided by this other expression. Let's have a quick look here. Now, this looks a little bit complicated. So if you want to download my source code, look below this video. I've attached it for you to download. And finally, after we calculate the mortgage, we use the number format class to format this value as a currency. So we get the result, store it in this string, mortgage formatted, and print it over here. Now here we could also avoid declaring this variable and simply add this expression over here. But I decided to do this to increase the readability of this code. Otherwise, this line would be so long. But that's just my personal preference. You don't have to follow this. All right, so this was my implementation of the mortgage calculator. However, this program has a number of problems. The first problem is input validation. So if we run this and enter a non-numeric value like XYZ, our program crashes. Or as another example, if we enter a negative value here, our program is not going to behave properly. So that's where conditional statements come to the rescue. In the next section, we're going to talk about conditional statements. You will learn how to use these statements to validate the values entered by the user. So that brings us to the end of this section. I hope you learned a lot and thank you for watching.